Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. Tomorrow sees the publication of a biography of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, which challenges the way we in India have seen the founder of Pakistan. It reassesses Nehru's role in partition. It sheds fresh light on the relationship between the early Gandhi and Jinnah. If my hunch is correct, this book will attract considerable attention and maybe even a fair amount of controversy. Today, in a special two-part interview with the author, I shall discuss the book and his conclusions. He is, of course, the former Defence, Foreign and Finance Minister of India and also a former soldier, Jaswant Singh. Mr. Jaswant Singh, let's start by establishing how you, as the author, view Muhammad Ali Jinnah. After reading your book, I get the feeling that you don't subscribe to the popular demonization of the man.
Oh, of course I don't. To that I don't subscribe. I was attracted by the personality which has resulted in a book. If I was not drawn to the personality, I wouldn't have written the book. It's an intricate, complex personality of great character, determination.
And it's a personality that you found quite attractive.
Naturally, otherwise I wouldn't have ventured down the book.
And there was a sense in which you were drawn to Jinnah as you read and found out more about him.
I think that's a repetitious question because I found the personality sufficiently attractive to go and try and research it for 5 years. And I was drawn to it, yes.
Now, as a politician, Jinnah joined the Congress party long before he joined the Muslim League, and in fact when he joined the Muslim League he issued a statement to say that this in no way implies even the shadow of disloyalty to the national cause. Would you say that in the 20s and 30s and maybe even the early years of the 40s, Jinnah was a nationalist?
Oh, I think really speaking, the acme of his nationalistic achievement was 1916 Lucknow Pact of Hindu-Muslim unity. And that's why Gopal Krishna Gokhale called him the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity.
And in your assessment as his biographer, for most if not the predominant part of his life, Jinnah was a nationalist?
Oh yes. Oh, he fought the British for an independent India, but he also fought resolutely and relentlessly for the interests of the Muslims of India.
Was Jinnah secular or was he communal?
It depends on how you view this word secular, because I don't know whether secular is really fully applicable to a country like India. It's a word born of the socio-historical and religious history of Western Europe.
Let me put it like this. Many people believe that Jinnah hated Hindus and that he was a Hindu basher.
Totally wrong. That certainly he was not. His principal agreement was with the Congress party. Repeatedly he says, and he says this even in the last statements to the press and to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan.
So his problem was with Congress and with some Congress leaders, but he had no problem with Hindus.
No, he had no problems whatsoever with the Hindus, because he was not in that sense until in the latter part of his years. He became exactly what he charged Mahatma Gandhi with. He charged Mahatma Gandhi with being a demagogue.
He became one as well.
That was the most flattering way of emulating Gandhi. I refer, of course, to Calcutta killings.
As you look back on Jinnah's life, would you say that he was a great man?
Oh yes, because he created nothing out of something. And single-handedly, he stood up against the might of the Congress party, his talent, against the British, who didn't really like him.
So you are saying to me that he was a great man?
But I am saying it's not an interrogatory matter.
Let me put it like this.
Yes.
Do you admire Jinnah?
I admire certain aspects of his personality, his determination, and the will to rise. He was a self-made man. He was not like Mahatma Gandhi was the son of a diwan.
Nehru was born to great wealth.
Great wealth. Nehru and all these were born to wealth or position. Jinnah created for himself a position. He carved out in Bombay a position in that cosmopolitan city. Being what he was, poor. He was so poor he had to walk to work. He lived in a hotel called Watson's in Bombay, it's still there. A W, only a W now, hangs rather forlornly. And he told, I think, one of the autobiographers, there's always room at the top, but there's no lift. And he never sought a lift.
Do you admire the way he created success for himself, born to poverty, but he ended up successful, rich?
I would admire that in any man, self-made man who resolutely worked towards achieving what he had set out.
How seriously has India misunderstood Jinnah?
I think we have misunderstood because we needed to create a demon.
We needed a demon and he was the convenient scapegoat.
I don't know whether he was convenient. We needed a demon because in the 20th century, the most telling event in the entire subcontinent was the partition of the country.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But first let me put to you the critical question your book raises. It asks, how is it that the man who they considered the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity in 1916 had transformed 30 years later by 1947 into the Quaid-e-Azam of Pakistan? And your book suggests that underlying this was Congress's repeated inability to accept that Muslims feared domination by Hindus, that they wanted space in a reassuring system.
I think here is the central contest between minorityism and majoritarianism. With the loss of the Mughal Empire, the Muslims of India lost power. But majoritarianism didn't begin to influence them until 1947. And then they saw that unless they had a voice in their own political and economic and social destiny, they would be obliterated. That is the beginning. That is still the purpose.
Let me ask you this. Was Jinnah's fear or anxiety about Congress majoritarianism justified or understandable? Your book, in its account of how Congress refused to form a government with the League in UP in 1937 after fighting the election in alliance with that party, suggests that Jinnah's fear was substantial and real.
Yes, you have to go not just 37, which you cited, see other examples, 46 elections. Jinnah's Muslim League wins all the Muslim seats, and yet they do not have sufficient number to be in office because the Congress party has, even without a single Muslim, enough to form a government, and they're outside of the government. So it was realized that simply contesting elections was not enough.
They needed certain assurances within the system to give them that space.
That's right, that's right. And those assurances amounted to, because that was a moving scale. It was first reservations, which I dispute, frankly. Reservations went from 25% to 33%, and then from reservations it became parity. No, we must be on equal term, parity to partition.
But all of this was search for space.
All of this was a search for some kind of autonomy of decision making in their own social and economic destiny.
Now your book reveals how people like Gandhi, Rajagopalachari and Azad could understand the Jinnah fear or the Muslim fear of Congress majoritarianism, but Nehru simply couldn't understand this. Was Nehru insensitive to this?
No, he wasn't. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a deeply sensitive man.
Then why couldn't he understand
But he was very deeply influenced by Western, European socialist thought of those days. For example, dominion status would have given independence, virtual independence to India in the 20s.
So in other words, Nehru's political thinking and his commitment to Western socialist thought meant that he couldn't understand Jinnah's concerns about majoritarianism. Nehru was a centralist, Jinnah was a decentralizer.
That's right. That is exactly what Nehru believed in, a highly centralized polity. That's what he wanted India to be.
And Jinnah wanted
a federal polity.
Jinnah wanted a federal polity, a decentralized polity, because that would give Muslims the space
that
to be.
Even Gandhi also accepted.
But Nehru couldn't.
Nehru didn't.
Refused to.
Well, consistently he stood in the way of a federal India until 1947 and became a federal India.
In fact, the conclusion of your book is that if Congress could have accepted a decentralized federal India, then a united India, as you put it, was clearly ours to attain. And you add, the problem was that this was an anathema to Nehru's centralizing approach and policies. Do you see Nehru at least as responsible for partition as Jinnah?
I think he says it himself. He recognized it. And his correspondence, for example, with late Nawab Sahib Bhopal, his official biographer, and others, he says, why did you win he's queried. These are very moving. His letter to late Nawab Sahib Bhopal is a very moving letter.
You're saying Nehru recognized that he was as much of an obstacle?
No, he recognized his mistakes.
Afterwards.
After.
But today, Nehru's heirs and Nehru's party will find it very surprising that you think that Nehru was as responsible for partition as Jinnah.
I'm not blaming anybody.
That's just the
truth.
truth.
I'm not assigning blame. I'm simply recording what I have found as the development of issues and events of that period.
So when Indians turn around and say that Jinnah was, to use a colloquialism, the villain of partition, your answer is that there were many people responsible. To single out Jinnah as the only person or as the principal person is both factually wrong and unfair.
It is. It is not borne out by events. Go to the last All India Congress Committee meeting here in Delhi in the June of 1947, I think, to discuss and accept the 3 June 1947 resolution. Nehru Patel's resolution was defeated by the Congress, supported by Gandhi. In the defeat, Ram Manohar Lohia had moved the amendment. It was a very moving intervention by Ram Manohar Lohia, and then Gandhi finally said, we must accept this partition. Partition is a very painful event. It's very easy to assign blame, very difficult thereafter, because all events that we are judging are ex post facto.
Absolutely. And what your book does is to shed light in terms of a new assessment of partition and the responsibility of the different players. And in that reassessment, you've balanced differently between Jinnah and Nehru.
So all vision, which is ex post facto, is 20 by 20. It's when you actually live the event.
Quite right. Those who lived it will have seen it differently, but today, with the benefit of hindsight, you can say that Jinnah wasn't the only or the principal villain, and the Indian impression that he was is mistaken and wrong.
And we need to correct it.
We need to correct it. Let's take a break at that point. I want to come back and talk to you about Jinnah and Pakistan. That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate, and the second part is this first special interview with Mr. Jaswant Singh on his forthcoming biography of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Mr. Jaswant Singh, let's turn to Jinnah and Pakistan. Your book shows that right through the 20s and the 30s, and maybe even the early years of the 40s, Pakistan for Jinnah was more of a political strategy, less of a target and a goal. Did he consciously, from the very start, seek to dismember and divide India?
I don't think it was dismemberment. He wanted space for the Muslims. And in Pakistan, he could just not define Pakistan, ever. Geographically, it was a vague idea. That's why ultimately it became a moth-eaten Pakistan. He had ideas about certain provinces which must be Islamic, and 1/3 of the seats in the central legislature must be Muslim.
So Pakistan was in fact a way of finding, as you call it, space for Muslims.
He wanted space in the central legislature and in the provinces and protection of the minorities so that the Muslims could have a say in their own political, economic, social destiny.
And that was his primary concern, not dividing India or breaking up the country.
No, he in fact went to the extent of saying, all right, he went to the extent of almost 20%, all right, let it be a Pakistan within India.
A Pakistan within India was acceptable to him. So in other words, Pakistan was often code for space for Muslims.
That's right. From what I have written, I find that it was a negotiating tactic, because he wanted certain provinces to be with the Muslim League. He wanted a certain percentage in the central legislature. If he had that, there would not have been a partition.
Would you therefore say that when people turn around and say Jinnah was communal, he was a Hindu hater, a Hindu basher, that they are mistaken and wrong?
No, he was not a Hindu hater, but he had great animosity with the Congress party and Congress leadership. He said so repeatedly. I have no enmity against the Hindu.
Do you as his author believe him when he says so?
How do I? I don't live at the same time as him.
No, but you made
I go by what his contemporaries have said. I go by what he himself says, and I reproduce it.
Let's come to this business of using Pakistan to create space for Muslims. Your book shows how repeatedly people like Rajagopalachari, Gandhi and Azad were understanding of the Jinnah need or the Muslim need for space. Nehru wasn't. Nehru had a European inherited centralized vision of how India should be run. In a sense, was Nehru's vision of a centralized India a problem that eventually led to partition?
Jawaharlal Nehru was not always that. He became that after his European tour of the 20s. Then he came back imbued with the, as Loya, and no, as Madhur Lemay puts it, imbued with the spirit of socialism. And he was all for centralized, highly centralized India.
And a highly centralized India denied the space that Jinnah and the Muslims were looking for.
Because highly centralized India meant that the dominant party was the Congress party. He in fact said there are only two powers in India, the Congress party and the British.
That attitude, in a sense, left no room for Jinnah and the Muslim League in India.
That is what made Jinnah repeatedly say, but there is a third force. The Congress could have dealt with the Moplas and the others. There were other Muslims.
So it was this majoritarian attitude of Nehru that actually left no room for Jinnah.
It became a contest between excessive majoritarianism, exaggerated minorityism, and giving the referee's whistle to the British.
But was the exaggerated minorityism a response to the excessive majoritarianism
In
of Congress?
part.
In part.
But in part also a response to the historical circumstances.
If the final decisions had been taken by people like Gandhi, Rajagopalachari or Azad, could we have ended up with united India?
Yes, I believe so. We could have. We would have wanted, Gandhi said, you British go home. We will settle this amongst ourselves. We will find a Pakistan. In fact, he said it until the last AICC meeting.
It was therefore Nehru's centralizing vision that made that extra search for united India difficult at the critical moment.
He continued to say so, but subsequently, after partition, he began to realize what a great mistake it had been.
He realized his mistakes, but it was too late by then. It had happened.
It was too late.
Let's end this first interview there. In the second part, I want to talk to you about the relationship you paint in the early Jinnah and Gandhi, the questions you ask about partition, and the predicament of those Muslims left behind in India. That's the second part of this special two-part interview. But for tonight, goodbye, good night. Hello and welcome to the second part of a special interview with Jaswant Singh, the former Finance Minister of India and the former Foreign Minister, on the biography he's just written of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, which was officially published on Monday. Mr. Jaswant Singh, let's start this second interview with the portrait you paint of the relationship between the early Gandhi and the early Muhammad Ali Jinnah. You say of their first meeting in January 1915 that Gandhi's response to Jinnah's warm welcome was ungracious. You say that Gandhi would only see Jinnah in Muslim terms, and the sort of implication that comes across is that Gandhi was less accommodating than Jinnah was.
I perhaps have not used the adjective that you have used. Jinnah returned from his education in 1896. Gandhi went to South Africa and was returning finally. In between he had come once, was returning finally to India. It was 1915 already. Jinnah had gone to receive him with Gokhale. And of course he referred to in fulsomely to Gandhi. And Gandhi referred to Jinnah that I'm very grateful that we have a Muslim leader. That I think was born really of Gandhi's working in South Africa, not so much as the reality of what he felt, but the relationship subsequently did become competitive.
But you do call that response ungracious.
It was. I don't call it. I don't know whether I call it ungracious.
You do.
But I might have. it was Jinnah is full somebody receiving Gandhi, and Gandhi says, I'm glad that I'm being received by a Muslim leader.
So he was only seeing Jinnah in Muslim terms.
Yes, which Jinnah didn't want to be seen.
Even when you discuss the impact of their political strategies in the early years before 1920, you suggest that Jinnah was perhaps more effective than Gandhi, who in a sense permitted the Raj to continue for 3 decades. You write, Jinnah had successfully kept the Indian political forces together, simultaneously exerting pressure on the government. Of Gandhi, you say that pressure dissipated and the Raj remained for 3 more decades.
That is a later development, because the political style of the two was totally different. Jinnah was essentially a logician. He believed in the strength of logic. He was a parliamentarian. He believed in the efficacy of parliamentary politics. Gandhi, after testing the water, took to the trails of India, and he took politics into the dusty villages of India.
But in the early years up to 1920, you see Jinnah as more effective in putting pressure on the British than Gandhi.
Yeah, because entire politics was really parliamentarians.
In fact, even the adjectives you use to characterize their leadership in the early years suggests a sort of, how shall I put it, slight tilt in Jinnah's favor. You say of Gandhi's leadership that it had an entirely religious provincial character. Of Jinnah's, you say, he was doubtless imbued by a non-sectarian nationalistic zeal.
He was non-sectarian. Gandhi used religion as a personal expression. Jinnah used religion as a tool to create something, but that came later. For Gandhi, religion was an integral part of his politics from the very beginning.
And Jinnah wanted religion out of politics,
And
at all times.
That's right. And the innumerable examples.
And in fact, Jinnah sensed or feared instinctively that if politics came into religion, it would divide.
There were two fears here. His one fear was that if the whole question or practice of mass movement was introduced into India, then the minority in India would be threatened, and we could have Hindu-Muslim riots as a consequence.
And the second fear?
The second fear was that this will result in bringing in religion into Indian politics.
Which he didn't want.
We didn't want that. Khilafat movement, etc. These are all examples.
And in a sense, would you say that events have borne out Jinnah?
Events, it didn't just Jinnah, it is Annie Besant. When the Home Rule League broke up, Annie Besant in the 20s actually resigning from the Home Rule League cautioned Gandhi, you are going down this path, this is a path full of peril.
Both Jinnah and Besant have been borne out.
That's right. In that sense that mass movement, unless combined with great sense of discipline, leadership and restraint, become chaotic.
As you look back on their lives and their achievements, Jinnah at the end of the day stood for creating a homeland for Indian Muslims, but what he produced was moth-eaten and it broke up into 2 in less than 25 years. Gandhi struggled to keep India united, but ended up not just with partition, but with communal passion and communal killing. Would you say at the end of their lives, both were failures?
Gandhi was a transparently honest man. He lived his political life openly. Jinnah did not even lead his political life, leave alone his private life openly. Gandhi led his private life openly. Noah Khadi, with a pencil stub, he wrote very movingly, I don't want to die a failure, but I fear I might.
And did he, in your opinion?
Yes, I'm afraid the partition of the land, the Hindu-Muslim divide, cannot really be called Gandhiji's great success. Jinnah, I think, did not achieve what he set out to. He got what is called a moth-eaten Pakistan, but the philosophy which underlay it, that Muslims are a separate nation, was completely rejected within years of Pakistan coming into being.
So in a sense, both failed.
I'm afraid I have to say that. I'm, in comparison, just a lay practitioner of politics in India. I cannot compare myself to these two great Indians. But I find my assessment would lead me to the conclusion I cannot treat this as a success either by Gandhi or by Jinnah.
Your book also raises disturbing questions about the partition of India. You write that it was done in a way that multiplied our problems without solving any communal issue. And then you ask, if the communal, the principal issue remains in an even more exacerbated form than before, then why did we divide it all?
Yes, indeed, why?
What's your answer?
My answer is why, indeed. I cannot yet find the answer. Why have we decided? Look into the eyes of the Muslims that live in India. And if you truly see through the pain that they live, to which land do they belong? We treat them as aliens, somewhere, inside. Because we continue to ask, even after Pakistan, you still want something? These are citizens of India now. That was Jinnah's failure. Because Jinnah never left and never really advised the Muslims that stayed back.
One of the most moving passages of your biography is when you write of Indian Muslims who stayed on in India but didn't go to Pakistan. You say they are abandoned, you say they are bereft of a sense of real kinship, not one in their entirety with the rest, and then you add, this robs them of the essence of psychological security.
That's right, it does. That lies at the root. Every kind of activity that we say lies at the root of such a committee report.
So in fact, Indian Muslims have paid the price in their personal lives.
Without doubt, as have Pakistani Muslims.
Muslims have paid the price on both sides.
I think Muslims have paid a price in partition. They would have been significantly stronger in a united India, effectively so, much larger land, every potential here. Of course, Pakistan or Bangladesh won't like what I'm saying.
Let's for a moment focus on Indian Muslims. You're a leader of the BJP. Do you think that the rhetoric sometimes of your party
I think
adds to that insecurity?
I did not write this book as a BJP parliamentarian or leader, which I'm not. I wrote this book as an Indian. I was not, and I'm not part of British India. I have written in my earlier books too, I never had a tradition of this kind.
Your book also suggests that at least intellectually, you believe India could face more partitions. You write, in India, having once accepted this principle of reservation, then of partition, how can we now deny it to others, even such Muslims as have had to or chosen to live in India?
Yes, so this whole problem started with the whole 1906 Muslim delegation, 1919 Montfort, reservations as a portion. What does such a committee report say? Reserve for the Muslims. What are we doing now? Reserve. I think this reservation for Muslims is a disastrous path. I have myself personally in Parliament heard a member belonging to subscribing to Islam saying we could have third partition too. Now these are the pain, they trouble me. What have we solved?
And in fact, as you say in your book, how can we deny it to others? Having accepted it once, it becomes very difficult intellectually to refuse it again.
So because you have to refuse it. India
even if you contradict yourself.
Of course, my contradicting myself is an intellectual contradiction.
But you've been honest enough to point out that this intellectual contradiction lies today at the very heart of our predicament as a nation.
It is. Unless we find an answer, we won't find an answer to India-Pakistan-Bangladesh relations.
And this continuing contradiction is the legacy of partition.
Of course. It's self-evident.
Let's take a break at that point. In the last part of this special two-part interview, I want to put to you that your book might bring down on your head a storm of protest. Does it worry you, or are you, how should I put it, sanguine about that? That's the last part of this special interview. See you in a moment. Welcome back to the last part of this special two-part interview with Jaswant Singh, the author of a new and challenging biography of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Mr. Jaswant Singh, let's come to how your book will be received. Are you worried that a biography of Jinnah that turns on its head the received demonization of the man where you concede that for a large part he was a nationalist with admirable qualities, could bring down on your head a storm of protest?
Firstly, I'm not an academic. This 60 years down the line, someone else, an academic, should have done it. Were it, then I wouldn't have persisted for 5 years. I have written what I have researched and believed in. I have not written to please. It is a journey that I have undertaken, as I explained myself, along with Muhammad Ali Jinnah, from his being an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity to the Qaeda-e-Azam of Pakistan.
In a sense, you were driven to write this book.
Indeed, because I still search for answers. Having worked with the responsibilities that I had, it is my duty to try and find answers.
And your position is that if people don't like the truth as you see it, so be it, but you have to tell the truth as you know it.
Well, so be it, is your way of putting it, my dear Karan. But I must, how do I abandon my search, my yearning, and what I have found? If I'm wrong, then somebody else should go and do the research and prove me as wrong.
But in other words, you are presenting what you believe is the truth.
What else can I?
And you can't hide it.
What else can I do? What else can I present?
In 2005, when L.K. Advani called Jinnah's August 11, 1947 speech, he was forced to resign the presidentship of your party. Are you worried that your party might turn on you in a similar way?
This is not a party document. My party knows that I've been working on this. I have mentioned this to Sheikh Advani as also to others.
But are they aware of your views and the content of the book?
They can't be aware unless they read them.
Are you worried that when they find out about your views and your analysis and your conclusions, they might be embarrassed and angry?
No, they might disagree. That is a different matter. Anger, why should there be anger or disagreement?
Can I put something to you?
Yes.
Mr. Advani, in a sense, suffered because he called Jinnah secular. You've gone further. You've compared him to the early Gandhi, and some would say that Gandhi is found a little wanting in that comparison. Will that inflame passions?
I don't think Gandhi is found wanting. He was a different person. There are two different personalities, each with their characteristics. Why should passions be inflamed? Let us have sufficient maturity, 60 years down the line of independence, to be able to stand up to what actually happened pre-47 and in 47.
So what you're saying is that Gandhi and Jinnah were different people. We must learn to accept that both had good points.
Of course.
And both had weaknesses.
Of course, Gandhi himself calls Jinnah a great Indian.
Of course.
Why don't we recognize that? Why did he call him that? He tells Mountbatten, give the Prime Ministership of India to Jinnah. Mountbatten scoffs at him. Are you joking? He said, no, I'm serious. I will travel India and convince India and carry this with.
So if today's Gandhians, reading the passages where you compare between the two, come to the conclusion that you're more of praise of Jinnah than of Gandhi.
I don't think I am. I'm objectively, as far as human beings have ability to be objective, as balanced as an author can be.
As balanced as an author can be.
Indeed. How else can it be?
Your party has a Chintan BAITHAK starting in 2 days' time. Does
That's
it worry
right.
you that at that occasion, some of your colleagues may stand up and say that your views, your comments about Jinnah, your comments about Gandhi and Nehru have embarrassed the BJP?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think they will. Because in 2 days' time, the book would not have been. It's almost a 600-page book. Difficult to read 600 pages in 2 days.
No one will have read the book by the time you go to Simla. Well, what about afterwards?
Well, we will deal with the afters when the afters come.
Let me raise two issues that could be a problem for you. First of all, your sympathetic understanding of Muslims left behind in India. You say they're abandoned, you say they're bereft, you say they suffer from psychological insecurity. That's not normally a position leaders of the BJP take.
I think the BJP is misunderstood also in its attitude towards the minorities. I don't think it is so. Every Muslim that lives in India is a loyal Indian, and we must treat them as so.
But you're the first person from the BJP I've ever heard say, look into the eyes of Indian Muslims and see the pain. No one has ever spoken in such sensitive terms of them before.
I am born in a district where that is my home. We adjoined Singh. I was not part of British India. We have lived with Muslims and Islam for centuries. They are part. In fact, in Jaisalmer, I don't mind telling you, Muslims don't eat cow, and the Rajputs don't eat pig.
So your understanding of Indian Muslims and their predicament is uniquely personal, and you would say to
Indeed,
people,
because I think what has happened is that we try and treat this whole thing as if an extension of the image of the UP Muslim. Of course, the UP is, Pakistan is a stepchild of UP in a sense.
the second issue that your book raises, which could cause problems for you, is that at least theoretically, at least intellectually, you accept that there could be, although you hope there won't be, further partitions. Could that embarrass you?
No, I'm cautioning. I'm cautioning India, Indian leadership. I have said that I'm not going to be a politician all my life, or even a member of parliament, but I do say this, we should learn from what we did wrong or didn't do right, so that we don't repeat the mistakes.
In other words, this is a, how shall I put it, wake-up call.
Wake up, shaking.
Shake-up call.
Yes.
My last question. Critics in your party allege that you're responsible for the party losing seats in Rajasthan. They allege that you're responsible for asking questions about the sanctity of Hindutva. Now, after this book, have you fed your critics more ammunition against yourself?
Time will tell.
But does it worry you?
Do I look worried?
With that smile on your face, Mr. Jaswant Singh, thank you very much for these two special interviews.
Thank you very much. Thank you.